Thank you very much. I'm sorry you've been so delayed today. Two things seem to go wrong. First of all, they had their first sort of international meeting of bus leaders, and the problem of languages was rather great. So everything had to be repeated about 3 times, and it took a long time. But from tomorrow they'll have it better organized with language meetings going on all at the same time, so that should help. And there are 1 or 2 points that I want to announce before we start the Gosho lecture. First of all, after this meeting at 4:30, all chapter chiefs, men and women, general chapter chiefs, men and women, have a special meeting with Gosho and Mr. Hiraki. So if they would wait behind here, we've then got to discover how we get to where the meeting is, all right? So if you'd wait immediately after the lecture. All chapter chiefs, men and women, general chapter chiefs, men and women. I think I've got one other point. You'll be pleased to hear that they're getting the breakfast better organized tomorrow. Now also, I think Tony Butler wanted me to mention that after Gongyo this evening, and as you know, by the way, during Gongyo, those who wish to take Gofu, and I do suggest you do, because I think Sensei sent it for you all for that purpose, those who wish to take it can do so immediately at the end of the Gongyo ceremony. And the second point is that there will be an information meeting for everybody with their bus leaders from 6 o'clock to 6:30. So immediately after Gongyo, you'll be able to go off with your bus leaders to some convenient shady place and have your meeting, all right? Fine. Now Tony Butler here, do you want to announce anything now? All right, fine. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Has everyone got the study material? Great. So, today we're going to talk about the Gosho on the Buddhist Prophecy. This was written in 1273, like so many other important Gosho, on Sado Island, where Nichiren Daishonin was in exile, living under really terrible conditions. But as many of you know now, during that period, his conviction in the future achievement of Causton Rufu was so great that he in fact wrote his greatest Gosho, his most important ones, on that island. So during that time, Gosho, like the opening of the eyes on the supreme object of worship, Shoho Jiso Sho, which you've been studying in England for 6 months, and the other Gosho which Gicho Yamazaki will lecture on later in this course, were all written at that time. So the meaning of this title, on the Buddha's prophecy, is really let's fulfill the Buddha's prophecy, or we are fulfilling it. The Buddha's prophecy that he refers to is the prophecy of Shakyamuni Buddha, that the earlier teachings of Shakyamuni would fade away into decline during the first 2,000 years after he died, and that in the period of Mappo that followed, the period we live in now, a Buddha would appear to teach the essence of the Lotus Sutra to all the people of the world. And that is the prophecy that this Gosho is about. So as I say, really the title means we are fulfilling that prophecy. Nichiren Daishonin started it by teaching Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, the essence of the Lotus Sutra, to as many people as he could in his age. And we and the rest of the members of the Soka Gakkai are continuing that. So in every time we shakabuku, we are fulfilling the Buddha's prophecy. Also in this Gosho, Nichiren Daishonin gives his own predictions, his own prophecies. In this Gosho, he clearly states his determination to create a happy and peaceful world. And he strongly says at one point in it, without fail, this will happen. This is really incredible when you think of the conditions he was living in. At that time, there were probably not more than 1,000 people chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo in Japan. That's all. And most of those people were simple farmers, and a sprinkling of the people in positions of authority or in the higher realms of society in those medieval days. And he, when he wrote this, was on this grim, desolate island far out in the sea, where no one had ever come back alive to the mainland. And yet he had the incredible conviction to say in this Gosho, without fail, this will happen. Without fail, Causton will be achieved. Without fail, the essence of the Lotus Sutra will fill the hearts of everybody. They're really fantastic. I don't think myself that if I was in those conditions, I could have such an incredible feeling of purpose for the future. Even in one part of this Gosho, he says, the chances are 1 in 10,000 that I will live for one more year. Yet still he had this conviction. And he knew, because he knew the Buddha's prophecies would come true. That's why he was so convinced. They were already being fulfilled. Each one of Shakyamuni Buddha's prophecies had come about in Nichiren Daishonin's life. He'd been attacked. He'd been beaten with a huge scroll of the Lotus Sutra by a soldier in a fight. Then they tried to behead him at Tatsunokuchi, and they exiled him to Izu Peninsula, and then again they exiled him now. So in a way, his exile to Sado was a triumph for himself, because this was finally fulfilling each one of Shakyamuni Buddha's predictions so far as the votary of the Lotus Sutra was concerned. That is to say, Nichiren Daishonin. So with those prophecies, each clearly and absolutely carried out, he knew that nothing could stop the prediction that Lotus Sutra would bring happiness to all mankind. So he then, Nichiren Daishonin, followed up in this lecture with strongly stating his own prophecy, based on the earlier one, that Nam-myoho Renge Kyo would without fail spread throughout the world. And he repeats that, of course, in many other Goshos. So really, in a way, I believe, this summer course is very strongly fulfilling the title of this Gosho on the Buddhist Prophecy. And we are realizing this more and more in our lives. I'd just like at this point to read out, if I have it here, Sensei's message again to you all, although I know you've read it again. My wish is that each and every one of you can, by feeling the reality of the absolute happiness which exists in the depths of human life, face life courageously, both in your homes and in your places of work. By feeling the reality of absolute happiness. All of you were born in order to prove to this world how great and glorious it is for an individual human being to achieve the human revolution. Please advance courageously with me, joining together in our activities and prayers towards the day of world peace, fulfilling the Buddhist prophecy. I'll now ask Jeff to read. We're not going to read the whole Gosho, and indeed we're not going to study the whole Gosho. There wouldn't be time. But just to help us understand the flow of it, the preparatory part of it, I'll get Jeff to read the first part down to halfway down the right-hand column on the first page in the UK. And then we'll skip a bit, and he will read the part that we're actually going to study in detail, which is on the page over here, the right-hand column. Page 11, and over the page to the end. All right? Right. Thank you, Jeff.
Fortune which enabled me to live in the last 500-year period and read the golden teaching of the Buddha. Those who accepted the Buddha's provisional teachings, even when they were born in this lifetime, did so because they were able to hear the Lotus Sutra.
Unable.
The scholars of the 7 sects to the north and the 3 to the south of the Yangtze River, as well as the scholars of the Keigon, Shingon and other sects, did not believe the Lotus Sutra. Although they were born either in the former or the middle day of the law, their Buddhist faith was to no avail. Chentai the Great stated, "In the last 500-year period, the mystic law shall spread, and it shall go far into the future to benefit mankind." Was he not referring to the time when the Lotus Sutra spreads in the world? Dengyo the Great declared, "The former and middle days are almost over, and the latter day is very near at hand." His words reveal how he longed to live at the beginning of the latter day of the law. The blessings of living in each of the 3 ages are different. I have been blessed in this age more than Ryuju and Tenjin, even more than Tiantai and Dengyo. Question: you are not the only person living in this 500-year period. Why are you in particular so overjoyed to be living now? Answer: the 4th volume of the Lotus Sutra reads, since hatred and jealousy abound even during the lifetime of the Buddha, how much worse will it be in the world after his passing? Concerning this, Tiantai the Great said, it will be much worse in the future because the Lotus Sutra is so difficult to teach. Milo the Great expanded on this. He said, the Lotus Sutra is so difficult to teach. To express the difficulty of teaching the sutra to the people in a way they can understand, the priest Chido explained further, it is said that good medicine is always better. Similarly, this sutra destroys attachment to the 5 vehicles and avows only the supreme vehicle. It rejects both the common mortals and the saints who follow the provisional teachings. It rejects both Hinayana and Mahayana. All those who are repudiated persecute the believers in the Lotus Sutra. Dengyo the Great proclaimed, the propagation of the Lotus Sutra will begin in the age when the middle day of the law ends and the latter day opens, in a land to the east of Tang and to the west of Katsu, among people stained by the 5 impurities who live in a time of conflict. The sutra reads, since hatred and jealousy abound, even during the lifetime of the Buddha, how much worse will it be in the world after his passing? These words have been justified. Dengyo wrote, as though he were talking about his own day, but actually he was describing the present age. That is what gives such profound meaning to his words. The former and middle days are almost over, and the latter day is very near at hand. The sutra informs us, devils and people under their control, spirits of the heaven and the sea, horrible demons, demons that consume human vitality and others, will perpetrate evil throughout these persecutions. In another part of the sutra, the names of the other demons appear: horrible demons, nimble demons, hungry demons, filthy demons, retaliating demons, red, orange, black and blue demons, and so forth. The sutra is saying that those who in previous existences embraced the provisional teachings, Brahmanism, or the doctrines of man and heaven, are born in this life as demons, heavenly spirits and humans, who persecute the votary of the true teaching when they see or hear him.
Thank you. We'll just pause there a moment so that we can summarize very quickly, without studying in the least, this first part of the Gosho. So really, in this first part, Nichiren Daishonin is clarifying the Shakyamuni Buddha's prophecy. He's explaining it. All right? So this is preparation. You remember the 3 processes of the Buddha's teachings: preparation, revelation, and then transmission. So the first part is preparation, when he goes through the prophecies of Shakyamuni again, clarifying them so that everyone is clear about them. He then talks about persecutions. Shakyamuni Buddha said that there would be persecutions. Nichiren Daishonin underwent them. And Nichiren Daishonin quotes from the sutra all these horrific demons, orange, red, and black, and all the rest of it, that are responsible for this persecution. Anyone feel that they've met the demon that consumes human vitality? So all these demons, in the old expressive way of explaining Buddhism of 3,000 years ago by the means of tales and parables, all these demons have a meaning. And of course, to sum them all up, they represent the negative forces which fight against us when we try to practice and follow the Buddha's teaching. Indeed, when we try to do anything which is for our happiness. So they're really, I think, very expressive. So in the next few days or few weeks, when you feel that you're being under attack from the negative nature that exists in your life, maybe you'll be able to spot which demon it is. All right, well, we're going to skip a bit now and then carry on.
Page 11. Question. You certainly do fulfill the Buddha's prediction of the votary of the Lotus Sutra, but are there no other votaries of the Lotus Sutra, perhaps in India or China? Answer. There can be only one sun in the heavens. Can there be more than one sovereign to rule the land? Question. What proof do you have? Answer. The moon appears in the west and spreads its light towards the east. The sun rises in the east and casts its rays to the west. The same is true of Buddhism. It spread from west to east in the former and middle days of the law, but will travel from east to west in the latter day of the law. Miao Lo the Great said, Buddhism has been lost in India, and they are seeking it abroad. Thus there is no Buddhism in India anymore. 150 years ago in China, during the reign of Emperor Causton, barbarians from the north invaded Tonkin and put an end to what little was left of both Buddhism and the political order there. Now, not a single Hinayana Sutra remains in China. Moreover, the majority of the Mahayana Sutras have been lost. Even when Gosho and other priests went forth from Japan to take some sutras to China, there was no one there to whom these sutras could be taught. Their efforts were as meaningless as trying to teach Buddhism to wooden or stone statues garbed in priests' robes or holding mendicants' bowls. This is why Junshiki said, Buddhism was first transmitted from the west, just as the moon first appears in the west. Now Buddhism returns from the east, like the sun rises in the east. The words of Miao Lo and Junshiki made it clear that Buddhism has been lost both in India and China. Question. Now I can see that there is no Buddhism in India or China, yet how can you be sure that Buddhism has died out in the eastern, western or northern continents of the world? Answer. The 8th volume of the Lotus Sutra reads, After the Buddha's demise, I will spread the Lotus Sutra within the entire southern continent and never allow it to perish. The word within indicates that the 3 other continents were excluded. Question. You have fulfilled the Buddha's prophecy. Now what do you yourself predict? Answer. There can be no doubt that the last 500-year period has already begun, as prophesied by the Buddha. I say that Buddhism shall, without fail, arise and flow forth from the east, from the land of Japan. Omens will occur in the form of natural calamities of a magnitude greater than ever before, witnessed in the former or middle days of the law. When the Buddha was born, when he turned the wheel of the doctrine, and also when he entered Nirvana, the omens were greater than any ever observed, both auspicious and inauspicious. The Buddha is the teacher of all saints. The Sutra describes how, at the birth of the Buddha, 5 colors of light filled the air, shining forth in all directions, and the night became as bright as noon. At the death of the Buddha, 12 white arcs crossed the sky from north to south. The light from the sun was extinguished, and the day became as dark as midnight. There followed 2,000 years of the former and middle days of the laws. Saints were born, and saints died, Buddhists and others, but never were there any omens of such great magnitude. From the beginning of the Shoka period through this year, however, there have been tremendous earthquakes and extraordinary phenomena in heaven, exactly like the signs that mark the Buddha's birth and death, telling us that a saint with the stature of a Buddha has been born. A great comet crossed the sky, but for which sovereign or subject did this omen come? The earth tilted, and 3 times great fissures opened, but for which saint or sage did this occur? Very clearly these tremendous omens, be they good or bad, are of such gravity that they must signify something extraordinary. Indeed, the great pure law is arising, and the pure The great pure law is arising and the pure law is dying out. Tiantai stated, by the fury of the rain one may know the greatness of the dragon, and by the fullness of the lotus one may know the depth of the water. Miao Lo said, the wise man can see the omens and what they foretell as the snake knows its own path. 21 years ago I, Nichiren, understood what was to come. Since then I have suffered persecution day after day and month after month. During the last 2 or 3 years I was almost put to death. The chances are 1 in 10,000 that I will survive through the year or even the month. If there are any who question, ask my disciples for detailed explanations. What a joyful thing it is that in one lifetime we can expiate the sins of slander from the eternal past. How fortunate to be able to serve the Buddha, who has never been known until now. Before anyone else, I pray that I can lead the sovereign and others who persecute me to the truth. I will tell Shakyamuni Buddha all of my disciples who have aided me. Before I die, I wish also to pass the great blessings of this faith to my parents who gave me birth to me. As if in a dream, I have understood the meaning of the Hoto chapter of the Lotus Sutra, which reads, to cast Mount Sumeru into the countless lands of the Buddhas would not be impossible, but to spread this sutra in the evil-filled world after the Buddha's passing will be extremely difficult. Dengyo the Great proclaimed, Shakyamuni taught that the shallow is easy to embrace, but the profound is difficult. To discard the shallow and seek the profound requires courage. Tiantai the Great practiced true to Shakyamuni's teachings and spread faith in the Lotus Sutra in China. Dengyo and his followers inherited the doctrine from Tiantai and disseminated it through Japan. Born in the province of Awa, Nichiren became the direct heir of these 3 Buddhist teachers and propagated the Lotus Sutra in the latter day of the law. Together, they should be called the 4 masters of Buddhism in 3 countries. Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, May the 11th in the 10th year of Bunai, Nichiren.
Jolly good, Jeff. Thank you very much. So great his words are, aren't they? Really, conviction breathes out of every single syllable. And yet his conditions seemed so impossible at that time. So, in this part of the Gosho that we study today, first of all, Nichiren Daishonin makes it very clear that without fail true Buddhism will spread throughout the world. And secondly, he makes it very clear that he has fulfilled the predictions or the prophecies of Shakyamuni Buddha and is therefore himself the true Buddha of Mappo, the age in which we now live. And thirdly, he shows clearly that the old Buddhism is dead. And fourthly, he gives his own prophecies about how Buddhism will in fact spread throughout the world. So, of course, from the point of view of the future after Nichiren Daishonin died, this is really a vital Gosho, because his whole spirit for carrying it on through into eternity is expressed in it. Jeff, would you read the first thing?
Question. You certainly do fulfill the Buddha's prediction of the votary of the Lotus Sutra, but are there not other votaries of the Lotus Sutra, perhaps in India or China? Answer. There can be only one sun in the heavens. Can there be more than one sovereign to rule the land? Question. What proof do you have? Answer. The moon appears in the west and spreads its light towards the east. The sun rises in the east and casts its rays to the west. The same is true of Buddhism. It spreads from west to east in the former and middle days of the law, but will travel from east to west in the latter day of the law. Miao Lo the Great said, Buddhism has been lost in India, and they are seeking it abroad.
Thank you very much. So, this is nothing to do with the geographical spread of Buddhism. This talk about India and China. In Nichiren Daishonin's day, the world, for anyone living in Japan, consisted of India, China, Korea, and Japan. Really, the world didn't go any further than that at that time for the ordinary person. Therefore, when Nichiren Daishonin talks here about India, Buddhism dying in India and China, he is really saying the earlier teachings of Shakyamuni have died in the world. And then he says earlier on, there can be only one sun in the heavens. And he goes on to say, the moon appears in the west and spreads its light towards the east. The sun rises in the east and casts its rays to the west. So here he's comparing Shakyamuni's Buddhism to the moon. And the moon, as you know, only reflects the light of the sun. The moon has no original power. What power the moon has comes from the sun. So he's saying that the earlier teachings of Buddhism were only a reflection of the greatness that was to come. Just a reflection of the sun. So just as Shakyamuni's Buddhism spread from India through to Korea and on to Japan or down into Southeast Asia, all in an easterly direction, so the sun will rise in the east and move west across the world. So the sun is the power. And it's very interesting, I think, that one of the great points of agreement between Professor Toynbee and Sensei was through Toynbee's conviction that the future philosophy of the world would definitely come from the East. Now, Toynbee understood the law of cause and effect working in history. The whole basis of his historical study over so many years arose out of this understanding. And through his study of history and cause and effect and the cycle of destiny expressed in the history of each nation, he became convinced that the philosophy of the future would arise in the East. And of course, this immediately was a meeting point or an agreement point when he first started to correspond with Sensei. And as you know today, not only Professor Toynbee, but I suppose ourselves and lots of other people feel that the East has something to offer in the West. So people are popping up and down Oxford Street, jingling bells and shaving their heads, Hare Krishna, and many people practice yoga earnestly and try transcendental meditation and so on. So at the moment people are confused. They feel they want something, they must find something new and fulfilling, yet their search hasn't necessarily yet led them the right way. But one by one, I believe, such people will find that these various practices aren't totally fulfilling. Of course, they may be of some value, but not totally fulfilling. And then, like me in my life, they'll start searching again. And in the end, one by one, many of them will find the Gohonzon. So the sun spreading its light from the east where it rises to the west will gradually, I believe, come true. Sensei said recently, the time of Nichiren Daishonin was like the darkness before the dawn. The time of Nichiren Daishonin, like the darkness before the dawn. And the time of Mr. Makiguchi, before the Second World War began, and just after it began, was like the period before the dawn when there is a sort of grayness in the sky, a certain lightning. And the time of Mr. Toda, some streaks of sunshine began to appear over the horizon, very small, but nevertheless strong beams of light. And Sensei said, now is about 8 a.m., this time in which we're living. So gradually the sun is rising and spreading its full light more and more across the world. When Sensei said that, of course, he was basing his remarks on these comments of Nichiren Daishonin's, where he likened Shakyamuni's Buddhism to the moon and the teachings of true Buddhism to the sun. Sensei also said, up to now, man has viewed the sun from the earth. But now the time has come for him to view the earth from the sun. To view the earth from the sun. And of course he's referring there to the perception and increased breadth and depth and height of one's understanding that grows through activating our Buddha natures through the practice of true Buddhism. We begin to see the earth in a completely new perspective. Before maybe we felt the earth was so big and we couldn't take anything in outside of it. But I believe the more you study Buddhism, the earth seems like a tiny little ball in the middle of a vast, eternal space or universe. And from that perspective, as if we were viewing that planet from the sun, we can look from the outside in. And through being able to do this, we can begin, through our wisdom, to see where things are going wrong and how things can be put right. So why is it that guidance is often valuable? Say you take a married couple fighting like hell. Someone comes along and gives them guidance. The couple are so full of emotion that they can't see wisdom clearly. But the person from outside is neutral, and he can look into their lives, and because of the power of the Gohonzon and Daimoku, and the wisdom which is in him, he can see clearly the problem between them, and make them understand it, and gradually overcome the problem. And in a sense, it's the same aspect when we look at the world. Through Buddhism, we can look from the outside in and see through our wisdom what it is that should be done. So I think often recently I've said, accept nothing blindly. Just because things have always been that way ever since you were born doesn't mean that that's the right way for civilization to go or for life to be lived. Maybe that particular thing is causing great unhappiness. When you read the newspapers, don't read them from the surface. Get used to looking deeply, as if you were outside the earth looking in. Every social problem, every political problem, every economic problem is not in the least outside of Buddhism. And the more we practice, the more we should look with a sharp eye of the Buddha at everything. So young people who are here, not old people like me, you have many, many, many years to live. Even in 20 years' time, you'll still be active, dynamic people. Imagine after 20 years practice, when we meet members from Japan who've practiced 20 years, they're so great often, aren't they? And we really think, gosh, I wish I was like that. But in 20 years' time, you will be like that. In 20 years' time, you can look at the world from the sun. And through your experience, you can change it. Of course, even in your lifetime, it'll only be a stepping stone. But it'll be another stepping stone towards the 21st century. So please, from now, everyone, everywhere in Europe, don't accept anything blindly. Thank you, Jeff.
150 years ago in China, during the reign of Emperor Causton, barbarians from the north invaded Tonkin and put an end to what little was left of both Buddhism and the political order there. Now, not a single Hinayana Sutra remains in China. Moreover, the majority of the Mahayana Sutras have been lost. Even when Gosho and other priests went forth from Japan to take some sutras to China, there was no one there to whom these sutras could be taught. Their efforts were as meaningless as trying to teach Buddhism to wooden or stone statues garbed in priests' robes and holding mendicants' bowls.
Really, Nichiren Daishonin didn't mince his words, did he? Their efforts were as meaningless as trying to teach Buddhism to wooden statues. So he was referring, of course, there to the decline of Shakyamuni's Buddhism. It had virtually disappeared, except as a formality, in China. And this, again, exactly fulfilled Shakyamuni's prophecies. Of course, it's interesting at that point to realize that only Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism will move like the sun from east to west if we fulfill the Buddha's prophecies. There's no one else but us, no one else but the Soka Gakkai. Of course, there are many bodhisattvas of the earth in the world, but they don't know they are. We're the only ones who are beginning to understand that. So we have to fulfill the Buddha's prophecy. So you may say, why the hell should I? I don't feel like a bodhisattva of the earth. Damn it! I'm not going to do it. But the facts are that this is your purpose. Sensei said in his message, our purpose is to prove the greatness of the human revolution. So what brought us to chant? Really, it's difficult to understand, isn't it? How it was that we came to find the Gohonzon by some peculiar way. If anyone had told me 10 years ago I would be chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, I would have told them they were completely nuts. But here I am, chanting it. Here are you, chanting it. And what is more, you go on chanting it, and you can't help yourself but think it's great and tell other people about it. Sometimes you curse it. When life's difficult and you're struggling, but you overcome the thing and you realize how great this Buddhism is, and you talk to others. If you don't do it, something seems wrong in your life. When I say you, I'm saying this because of my experience. In one Gosho said, Nichiren Daishonin said, referring to the mission of the Bodhisattvas of the earth, that if they don't carry it out, evil very quickly takes hold of their lives. Why? Because really inside, if we're not doing what the purpose of our life is, we feel desperate. We feel wrong, out of balance. And we probably turn to doing a lot of extremely stupid things in order to forget that we are bodhisattvas of the earth and we have chanted Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. This is what Nichiren Daishonin meant when he said that. This is our mission. And there are tens of millions of people who live in this world now, whose mission a little later, either in this life or in their next life, will also be to propagate Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. But we happen, I think, to be fortunate enough to be the earlier ones. So we can go to Tretz and sit a few feet away from the European Gonzen. But in 10, 20 years, we'll be really lucky if we're within 100 yards of it. So, this is our task, and the vital point in it is what Mr. Izumi mentioned in his message this morning, the principle of Honinmyo. The principle of Honinmyo is really the principle of happiness. Really it is. The more I think about it, the more I feel it. The first time I began to think deeply about Honinmyo was when I went to Japan in January this year, and Mr. Izumi talked to me for an hour and a half, and I don't think he talked about anything else but Honinmyo from beginning to end. Honinmyo is a fantastic principle. Starting from now, making the cause this minute, and the next day, and the next day. Forgetting the past, not feeling guilty, not feeling miserable and ashamed at your lot, but starting from now, Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Really, it's fantastic. Really, the two great principles are fantastic that arise out of it. Hendoku Yaku and Tenji Kyoju. Turning poison into elixir or good medicine, and turning heavy karma into light. And both, turning heavy karma into light. Sorry. Tenju Kyoju. I wrote it down myself. Let's have a look. Tenjukyoju. Yes, Tenju Kyoju. All right? Turning heavy karma into light. So these can both be achieved through the spirit of Honinmyo. It's only, of course, one's negative nature, all those black, blue, red and orange demons that dance about inside us, that make it so difficult sometimes to practice Honinyo. Or it's our doubts or lack of conviction. But the fact is that every time you chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, you're making the great cause which will turn poison into good medicine and change heavy karma into life. You think nothing's happening in your life, but guaranteed, after time has passed, you realize this has happened, that what the Buddha taught has actually happened. You have turned heavy karma into light. You have turned poison into good medicine. So the principle of Honinyo is fantastic. And this principle is carried through the master-disciple relationship. So the master-disciple relationship is vital to Buddhism. The master teaches, we absorb, and then we act. So Churchill was a great leader, Sensei once said. But he had no disciples. So when Churchill died, the great things which Churchill believed in died with him. His ability, his qualities of leadership, and so on. De Gaulle was a great leader, but when de Gaulle died, no one really could continue his theories. Jesus Christ, on the other hand, was also a great leader, but he had disciples, and his disciples transmitted his teachings as best they could. And Christianity rolled right over the whole world in one way or another. But the disciples, unfortunately, didn't understand that they should have disciples. And so I believe because of that, the Christianity became ritualistic and ceremonial and formalistic and authoritarian, and as a result, the true spirit of Jesus Christ began to die. So the master-disciple relationship is vital. Our relationship with Sensei, our relationship through Sensei with Nichiren Daishonin. What Sensei teaches us is Hongamyo, something that has already happened the moment he's taught, something which is based on Sensei's wisdom and experience. When we read the Gosho, it is Hongamyo. We are listening to the wisdom of Nichiren Daishonin, arising from the experience of Nichiren Daishonin. What makes it Honinyo is the action we take. So to sit here and listen to these words and do nothing is Hongamyo. But to sit here and listen to these words and take action is Honinyo. Making the causes now. So the master-disciple relationship is based on the principle of action. We listen, we absorb, and we act as best we can in our own circumstances. Later in this Gosho, Nichiren Daishonin says, if there are any who question, ask my disciples for the detailed explanations. He didn't say, come and see me. Ask my disciples. The disciples will act as best they can in accordance with the teachings of the Buddha in their own particular area and district. If you're a group leader or a district leader or a chapter chief or a general chapter chief or whatever it is, young men's chief in a chapter, young women's chief in a general chapter, you are the disciple. You should represent the principle of Honinmyo. You listen and study the teachings of Nichiren Daishonin. You take it into your life and you act. How you act in your group will not necessarily be the same as how you act in your group or district. But you both absorb the teachings and you act in the best way for the circumstances and people whom you live with. So what I do in the UK would not at all suit, probably, what Dr. Yamazaki is doing in France, or what Mr. Saito is doing in Brazil. But each of us strives to do what we believe Nichiren Daishonin, through senses guidance, expects us to do. This is the principle of Shitefuni, the master-disciple relationship. And it is embedded in the principle of Honinmyo. So Shakubuku, of course, is an expression of this same principle, here stated so clearly in this Gosho. Buddhism should spread like the sun, but the only way it spreads like the sun is through each of us representing the sun. Each of us not being shy about the light that can so easily shine from us if we just allow our lives to open up enough to talk to others about Buddhism. In that sense, each of us is the sun also.